Yo, this is me, Mike, Ringmaster of the Imagination Circus, and welcome to the circus. I'm back. I know it's been a while. I have a very good excuse. My computer got fried, meaning I accidentally spilled some liquid on said computer, and it's taken me a few months to get a new one, which means I can finally edit videos again, henceforth why I'm here to actually release this for your entertainment, hopefully. Anyway, since perfect timing, really. This just got released. It's been a few days already when I'm recording this, but regardless, this is out. This is RWBY, Roman Holiday, the third in the young adult novels written by one E.C. Myers for the RWBY franchise from Rooster Teeth. I, of course, pre-ordered this one like I pre-ordered all the other books, and I have read it in the span of less than 24 hours, so a little, and as such, I'm going to give you my thoughts. I've also taken some notes, which is going to be a new format as going forward, along with some of the other stuff I'm going to be doing on the channel going forward. But regardless, let's go over it. Overall, I'd say I like this book. It's kind of hard to compare it to the last two. If I were to be perfectly honest, I think I like this one more than After the Fall, but less than Before the Dawn. I'm not sure what it is. It's hard to say, really. If I were to compare it, I would say it's... of all of the three books we got, I think this is the one I had the most expectations for, and therefore that's why, having set up those expectations, maybe not to say they were too high, but just that they were strongly set on what I wanted to happen, and that didn't necessarily happen here. But regardless, the book was good. It was fun to see the beginning of Neo and Roman's relationship and their individual origins, along with the interesting connections it created within the world of RWBY. Anyway, let's go through my notes. Those should make some interesting talking points. All right. First note I made essentially was questioning how much Neo was the same person as quote unquote trivia vanille. Again, how you pronounce that is obviously up in the air, being that it's written. But trivia vanille, otherwise Neo's real name apparently, it comes off like she has a bit of a split personality, and until her mother quote-unquote breaks Neo, the Neo part of her personality doesn't really come back into her and therefore assert itself more. And I think the word asserts even comes up at one point while she's thinking about it herself. So it's really unclear, but it seems like Neo essentially had a bit of a split personality that came together, and she became whole again and became herself and thus became Neo. To say the least of it. It's all very complicated. That's a simple point. I'm just saying, throughout the book, as I read it, I became more and more convinced that Neo's sanity was a little and I never got the impression in the show, based on what we saw of her, that she was 100% there, but even in this book, it made me really question her sanity. I don't know, maybe it could just be me, but it came off like Neo was a little way more off than I ever perceived in the past. But regardless, let's move on a bit. So apparently, her father is a member of the Vale City Council, which I found very interesting. I don't know why that struck out to me. Probably it's because, the one instance we really see the Vale Council is when they reprimand Ozpin at the end of Volume 2, except all we see of them is shadows, and we don't really see them. Granted, at this point, Jimmy Vanille would have been dead, so, obviously he's not one of the council members, but that's still, also, the specific way they describe, his title is described in the book is City Manager, and they kind of go into it throughout the book, but I'm like, what really is a city manager? And I don't know, I found that a little bit odd. That title, was a little vague as far as I'm concerned. At least with somebody say, Ironwood, we get the impression, he's the head of the military and he's the head of the academy. And those are two easily distinguishable roles. But what does a city manager do? Maybe that's something that really exists and I'm just ignorant. If that's the case, please feel free to tell me, preferably in a respectful manner. But whatever, that's just something that stuck out to me. Okay, so this is also something that I found very funny, but the fact that like, this is just hilarious to me. Like, granted, like, so Roman apparently worked for Little Miss Malachite, and I was just, that blew my freaking mind, I gotta tell you. And I wasn't entirely surprised to see Little Miss Malachite, of course, especially once we found out that Roman was from Mistral, which that's another character, because here's a funny thing. If you look into the backgrounds of every member of Team Juniper, they're all from Mistral. Jean's is a little bit more ambiguous, but that's what it seems like. And as such, I just found it interesting that, okay, we have another character who's apparently from Mistral, but for some reason is operating in Vale. And we find out why Roman was operating out of Vale, but still, it's interesting. Also, I find it ironic. Roman was dragged in to see Little Miss, and it turns out that, you know, obviously she's operating out of the same bar she has as when we first meet her in Volume 6? Yeah, Volume 6. And what I think is very funny about that is, how do I put this? Like, the fact is, this is where Neo would eventually show up to come in to kill Cinder and avenge Roman. The irony being that, like, do you think, does Little Miss recognize Neo when she gave that information to, like, on Cinder? Like, does, like, I mean, like, is it just me? Like, why does, like, I have to assume that, like, Little Miss recognized Neo when she gave that information on Cinder, because it would seem ridiculous otherwise. It's just weird to think about, because there's connections there we didn't even know about before this. Like, to say the least. Going down, of course, we have the, like, this, like, this is something I, like, specifically having to do with, like, how I described, quote, trivia, and I even put her name in quotations because obviously it's Neo, but, so let's just say, Neo was a sheltered, spoiled child, not wholly in touch with reality, a lesser version of Weiss. And what I meant by that, because that sounds unduly harsh, and I'm going to be honest, this book made me far more sympathetic towards Roman than it did towards Neo. And my feelings about, like actually, I should probably lay out exactly my feelings towards Roman and Neo going forward anyway, so before we move on with what I wrote down. Roman as a character to me has always been, like, entertaining, fun, interesting, but, like, you know, but I was never the most attached to him. Like, don't get me wrong, I was shocked when he died, and I was, like, saddened by it because he was one of the most entertaining characters in the show. But the fact was that I didn't miss him too badly. Neo, I always knew was alive. Like, it was always obvious to me that she'd just flown off, and we were probably going to see her again eventually. Every time people jumped on the gun before she actually did come back was a little annoying, but she came back, so that's fine. With Neo herself, Neo, again, is a very entertaining character. I was always a little bit more apprehensive towards her, say, compared to Roman, because while Roman is obviously not opposed to killing people and obviously killing our heroes, Neo was shown to have actually be this close to killing Yang, like this close. Like, it was like a hair's thing, you know? And the only reason Yang isn't dead is because Raven showed up and saved her. And it's like, you know, I don't know. I'm always a little apprehensive when we've got a villain that is just this ready to go and actually murder our main characters, you know? Not to say I don't like Neo, and I definitely feel for her, especially after reading this. Like, I do, like I said, I feel way more sympathetic to Roman's situation. With Neo, like, and part of the reason I don't feel as sympathetic to Neo is because I don't feel like her parents came off as bad. Don't get me wrong. Like, that bad. Like, don't get me wrong. They were bad parents, but they never came off across as, like, the worst kind of parents. Like, not like, say, Jacques, as just the, like, evident example we have from the show of the worst kind of emotionally abusive, manipulative kind of parent who just ruined his whole family. Like, don't get me wrong. Neither of Neo's parents come off particularly in a good light. Like, neither, like, for a number of reasons, but the whole thing about the both of them was that, it's just really hard to describe, but the essence of it is that it came off more like Neo, like Neo was not trying to be cooperative. Obviously she was sheltered to the point that she had to almost create this imaginary friend that in essence became a sort of split personality, like I said. But when you get down to the crux of it, I don't know, I feel like, maybe it's just me, maybe it's just E.C. Meyer's writing not working for me in this particular instance, but it wasn't as effective as I think it could have been in making Neo's situation seem bad. And it was bad, but I just think it could have been a little worse. Does that sound horrible? I feel like it does. I don't know. Let's see. What did I say? Oh, yeah. Like, she was and you know what? I basically just explained the whole thing about her being a lesser version of Weiss. Like, her situation could have been worse. But like I said, neither of her parents, at least to me, came off as bad as Jacques. Like, you know, granted, Jacques is, like, one of the worst examples you can have of a parent, but it's just funny to me that, like, you know, neither, like, you know, it just didn't cut. It didn't deliver as much as it could have, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion, regardless. Next point was, of course, Melanie and Militia Malachite, I believe I'm saying that correctly, are Little Miss Malachite's daughters, which, okay. And granted, there is always the possibility that they were related, the fact that they're both of them are involved in crime and whatnot. It's just funny to me to think that was like, because people speculated about that when we found out Little Miss Malachite's name. Some people didn't even remember the Malachite twins. I did, but it's still, like, I never considered the idea that they might be her daughter, especially because they don't look anything like their mother. It must get their looks from their father, who Roman, of course, speculates that he's probably dead, which he probably is, assumedly, you know, criminal business. However, that makes it very interesting that in the future, they seem to work for Junior. Why are they working for Junior? Because obviously the criminal, like, there was an alliance of sort between Hai Zhang, you know, Junior's father, and Little Miss Malachite. But she, Little Miss, decided to move in on the Veil racket. And they, like, so they had a sort of alliance, but she decided to move in and sort of, like, you know, try to stake a claim in Veil. That didn't work out, thanks to Roman and Neo, of course. But presumably, if her daughters are working or in the custody of, or, you know, whatever, with Junior, who is obviously probably, like, didn't have as much of a foothold in Veil, unlike, say, his father, which is probably why he seems to only be working as something like an information broker, lending his men out to Roman, and, you know, like, running a bar and a nightclub, and presumably the apparently existing illegal casino hidden in the back of the place. So, but otherwise, it doesn't seem like Junior's got much going on. So, my thoughts on this, and this is my theory, is that Little Miss is has created a sort of alliance with Junior, because Junior himself didn't know what he was doing. Like, his own father disparaged him. Presumably, Little Miss Malachite has actually made some sort of deal with Junior, and there's a standing alliance where Little Miss is on top and Junior is sort of subordinate, and her daughters are there as sort of security / insurance and of the alliance in question. It's really kind of vague and not entirely clear, but it raises some interesting questions, and that's just my thoughts on the subject. But honestly, I thought it was cool use of the Malachite twins, because we really hadn't seen them since Volume 2. We hadn't seen Junior since Volume 2 either. So it's interesting to get this insight into that situation in Veil and Mistral, and the whole idea of what's really going on with the criminal underworld. I mean, and it makes sense. When we were following both Neo and Roman, it makes sense that we're going to get that insight, but it's still fascinating. And I certainly didn't expect that, and that was one of the highlights of the book for me. Going forward, let's see. I wrote this down because I thought this was hilarious, but Roman, I think it was, during his conversation with the twins, specifically with Melanie, she brought up how, or rather, she pointed out how everything runs on dust, and taking control of, a dust, which that comes up a couple of times, taking control of the dust racket and affecting it in some way. And it's ironic because that's all pretty much exactly what Roman and you know, Cinder were doing in the first 3 volumes, or at least in the first volume anyway, taking most of the dust and take control of the racket to create tension and whatnot. You know, so like I feel like that may have been a weird form of backwards foreshadowing, for lack of a better way to put it. But specifically, Roman is thinking about this, if I'm remembering this correctly, and he like literally thinks, like, you know, it literally runs everything from planes, trains, and automobiles. That's the exact line. Some E.C. Myers, I don't know if that was a note from like Carrie and Eddie when they like gave the story outline to him to use this joke, or if that's a joke that E.C. Myers themselves made. Somebody in the planning stages of writing this book decided to put in a planes, trains, and automobiles joke is like, and I have to think of it as a joke because there's no way that wasn't meant as a joke, and I just found it like, I don't know. It's such a bizarre reference to make. I mean, it's kind of on par with whenever somebody does the like something something oh my joke, you know, like the lions, tigers, bears oh my joke.
Lions, tigers, bears,
oh my.
You know, where you fill in the blank or you go with that classic line of those 3 things. Because it's the kind of, except that unlike, you know, that joke I see all the time, I much more rarely see planes, trains, and automobiles, but it's still such a, like, on-the-nose reference. I think it's a little ridiculous. You know, it's like, and I'm not even talking about, like, let's say the movie with that title. I'm talking about that is a phrase. It's not a commonly used phrase nowadays, but it is a phrase, so I just think it's bizarre that it's there. But maybe I'm being, I don't know, that just caught my attention, but maybe, like, let's move on. Okay, so then I want to talk about Chameleon. This person who apparently had a thing for Roman, which, understandable, Roman's got some game. But regardless, this person's semblance sounds a lot like, kind of like Ilya's, like, chameleon, like, faunus trait. And we know that in Ilya's case, it is her, like, faunus trait. It's not, like, a semblance. That's her trait as a faunus, being able to change her colors. Now, of course, in this case, it does describe that this chameleon person, at least it makes it sound like this person can only change their skin color, not everything else. In which case, that's where the quote-unquote invisibility cloak comes in, because apparently Atlas had been working on that. And I'm not surprised Atlas was working on that, but the fact that that's even a thing raises a bunch of questions, like, that I don't even want to get into. But suffice to say, it raises some questions. Now, I just found it weird because it's like this person is both called Chameleon and has a similar enough power, and I feel that's weird. Granted, one's a semblance, the other is a faunus trait, but it's still just a bizarre resemblance. And this person I don't think is meant to be a faunus. I don't think there's meant to be any connection to Ilya. I just thought it was a weird coincidence. Maybe a bit of oversight on, you know, like Eddie and Carrie's part when they gave the outline, or maybe that was something specifically, again, E.C. Myers themselves came up with. I have no clue. Okay, then my next note indicates something specifically from when Neo was being tutored, and I'm gonna just call her Neo because, like, 1, it's Neo, and 2, because I still have no idea how her quote-unquote true name or real name is pronounced. So anyway, but apparently, like, at least according to a tutor who is a former huntress and a teacher at, like, regardless, she worked at that combat school, the same school that apparently both, like Ty and Crow both worked at, like, what their status in that case, like, I assume Ty still works there, Crow no longer works there, but according to her, it was apparently the people of Vale who attacked Mistrali settlers on the continent that started the Great War. Now that seems weird to me because in the World of Remnant video about the Great War, it was left a little vague exactly what which side, and I believe Crow was the one narrating that one, and he made it very clear that it was like, you know, nobody knew exactly who was responsible. Now, this claims differently. Of course, in a standard educational system, you're probably going to give like a more concrete answer for your students to go with or whatever. I just think it's interesting that that's true. If so, I do not think that it was a directly ordered attack from the King of Vale. It sounds more like it was like just a sort of tight tensions, as mentioned in the original World of Remnant video, rose high, and then somebody decided to shoot, and then it escalated from there, and then it started with, you know, Vale, the people of Vale specifically. I don't think the King of Vale had anything to do with it, because by all accounts, the King of Vale was, like, still not confirmed, but it's all but confirmed that the King of Vale was the former, like Ozpin's predecessor in the line of Ozma successors. It's complicated, you know how it is. However, because that's the case, it's like, it raises some interesting question. It means that, like, Vale had no choice but to join the war to support those citizens for making a mistake, and a costly one, obviously, considering the fact that this war went on for like a decade and cost so many lives, and it's all just very interesting, to say the least, you know, but like, that's just more world building in that case, and it's very offhand, so it's like little vague, like, is this what actually happened, or is it just like the common consensus on what happened? It's not really clear, but regardless, then there's like a couple of things like this bit where apparently like Neo, as a figment of not Neo's imagination, holds up a sign that says 9.5, and I just wrote down, like, because I thought of this, it seemed like a RWBY Chibi reference. It's not immediately obvious if it is or it isn't, but I'm assuming it's a RWBY Chibi reference, and there's at least one other instance of this that, well, when I get to it, I'll point it out to you guys. Like, also, apparently, and I really shouldn't be surprised by this, again, it's just like, it shows that Remnant in the end is not that dissimilar from our world. They got all the vehicles. They also have an equivalent of YouTube where there are tutorial videos, specifically one titled How to Pick Any Lock Tutorial, which, you know, apparently Neo decided to look into, which makes sense, but also, I mean, I'm sure I could find a title. You know what? I bet if I could find a video with that exact title on YouTube, I'll put a link of it in the description for you guys, because because there's probably true that it exists. It's just ridiculous as far as I'm concerned, and I don't know. I just find that funny because it's so real, and it's one of the whenever the world of Remnant breaches real world territory and becomes like, you know, whenever it does something, shows something that seems a little too real, it always takes me out of it a little bit. It's like, that's a little too close to what we got going on over here. You know what I mean? Like, the politics are fine. It's like, just keep it in the confines of, obviously what they would call the internet is not the same as what we have, but still, it's just weird as far as I'm concerned. All right, this is something that I want to point out, and I do actually like this. I like that the flamethrower trick didn't work. I like that when Neo attempted to just burn, or essentially melt the lock, I like that 100% just did not work as far as, like, they were concerned. Like, how do I put this? Like, it made sense to me that it wouldn't work, and I'm just happy that it didn't. Because if it didn't work, then, like, if it had worked, it would have seemed like Neo was unstoppable. And Neo is pretty badass. Neo can do a lot and is very skilled in a variety of things, including lockpicking. It's just, if using the hair dryer and the candle had actually worked to get her out of her room, I think I would have been a little disappointed. It would have been too easy. But instead, the trope is subverted, because in a lesser writer's hands, this would have just worked. Instead, what happens is instead the whole room is set on fire, and eventually the entire top floor of the goddamn house, which, seeing in hindsight that there was apparently an entire freaking catch of dust hidden under Neo's bed, make things far more terrifying in hindsight. And considering we literally see what happened with that dust, yeah, That makes sense. That makes sense. Regardless, I'm just happy that that didn't work because it, it would have been too easy. That's the best way I can put it. I'm just happy that it didn't work out that way. Finally, this is actually something that happened right after, like, Neo jumped out her own window to escape the fire. She said she felt like, I'm going to try and say this, Alex. I don't know if that's supposed to be Alice because it was spelled A-L-Y-X. So is it still Alice or is it Alex? I mean, I've always, because which appears, based on the way Neo says it, the girl who fell through the world. Like, it appears that that is the name of the girl who fell through the world. And of course, apparently Neo is a fan of fairy tales and read a bunch of them, being stuck in a room with very few other things to do. But if that is the case, that's what makes me wonder. Is it, because it was never 100% clear if that was a direct Alice in Wonderland reference. But if it is, then okay, that makes sense. It's just, it makes me curious, is the best way I can put it. I can't even describe exactly, but it's interesting to me. And it raises some even more questions like, okay, well, what happened exactly in the story? Because and it makes sense, especially if this is related to the arc we're going to have going forward in Volume 9, which will include Neo. So it's just interesting to me that it's like, it builds more upon, obviously, the fairy tale theme of the show and, and the world in general. And the fact that, like, Neo, of all people, was one of those people who had an interest in fairy tales, which, I like. That's a cool detail. I appreciate that. Moving on, one of my favorite moments from the book was just Roman watching the news about himself, because of course he is, and commenting on it because of course he is, because he's Roman Torchwick. Why wouldn't he be doing that? If that doesn't fit both his ego and his overall personality and his sense of humor, I don't know what does. But anyway, like, literally, they talk briefly to freaking Ozpin. We get a little bit of Ozpin in the book, and he talks right into the camera and addresses Roman directly, because even though he doesn't say it, it's kind of implied that Ozpin knows, based on, like, what he's seen, and he's been around long enough in all of his lives, long enough to recognize this personality in Roman that, like, knows that he's watching right now. And so Roman, like, almost chokes, like, because, like, he gets called out directly. And of course Ozpin. And that draws back to something that I want to bring up, and I might as well bring it up here. So I was wondering if this was going to happen in the book, and it didn't. Roman, how do I put this? Roman, like, needs to be arrested at some point in the timeline. Now, relative to everything else, let's say from, like, the actual stuff from the show, what actually, like, happened is, like, really unclear. Like, I'm trying to remember, like, I think they based, if you follow the timeline of events right up until Roman and Neo actually meet for the first time, and it's specified in the book that at that point Neo was about 18 and Roman was, for the life of me, I can't remember, but he's in his mid-20s basically. That being the case, it's not specified exactly when, like, the events of the show happened, but it's got to be, like, only, like, a handful, like, at most, I'd say something like 5 years before the start of the show. I could be wrong, obviously, and it's a little unclear exactly how far into the future this is, and one, say, even something like the Yellow trailer takes place in reference, because obviously there are a couple of points, like, Roman shows up in that, Junior shows up in that, the Malachi twins do as well. So it's like, where in the timeline this is relative to the show is unclear. However, if you go back and watch, I believe this was in episode 1 or chapter 1, Ruby Rose, volume 1 of the show, we briefly see on the news from, funnily enough, Lisa Lavender, who also shows up in this show. And seriously, this is honestly also, that bit in the end, when Roman's talking to her and she throws away her pin from Miss Browning's school. I like calling her Miss Beats more, also, or Miss Beat. And also, could I just say, that's a character I actually wouldn't mind seeing more of. I don't think she was there, and if she was, she would have been with Little Miss Malachi. But I like that character, actually, all things considered, even though she's obviously a bad guy. I mean, you can like bad guys, obviously. This whole book is technically about 2 bad guys, but it's still funny to think about. Point is, like, in the first chapter of the show, the very first one we ever saw, we briefly see on the news, like, essentially Roman's, like, mugshots, like, pictures of his mugshots. And it's like, which I guess mugshots are pictures, but still. We see Roman's mugshots, and I wasn't sure, because I initially considered maybe those mugshots were from his time in Mistral, because he never gets arrested in this book. However, like, he's wearing the outfit that Neo gave him. Like, his signature outfit, it's essentially explained that Neo was the one who gave it to him. Same way he gave her, Hush, her parasol, and therefore, it would indicate that this, and since it doesn't happen in this book specifically, it means that Roman gets arrested at some point between now and the beginning of the show. And that makes me wonder, one, under what circumstances did he actually get caught? And two, I assume Neo was the one who got him out. It's just interesting to consider. Also, it's mentioned that he had a ponytail several times. Correct me if I'm wrong, he didn't have a ponytail in the show, right? So, like, when did he get rid of that? Like, because they don't say in the book. Like, it's like, how long did he have a ponytail for? Like, when did he stop having that? I mean, I've always assumed that Roman, by the time we meet him in the show, is, like, in his early 30s. And again, I need to look up what his exact age would be at this point in the timeline in the book, at the end of it specifically. But assuming I'm right, let's say he's what, like 31, like that Neo would therefore be in her early to mid-20s, I think, because when we first are introduced to both of them, he's 18 and she's... Hold on, give me a second. These numbers confuse me, and I hate it, really. But she's about 8. So there's a decade difference between them. So if I'm right, and let's say Roman is about 31 when we meet him at the beginning of the show, and that would so actually, if that's true, I guess that means if she was 18, that would mean that Roman is about 28 at the end of the book, if my math's right. Granted, it's not entirely clear if the first 2 chapters, and all the other subsequent chapters until they meet up, it's not entirely clear if it's happening at the same time, except obviously that the news, like, goes back to the burning of the mansion, but that's a minor, simple example before they actually meet up in person. The point is that if this is accurate, and Roman is about a decade Neo's senior, then, and my assumption is, like, he's in his, like, early 30s. Let's say, like, and, like, give it a little bit more time, and let's say it's, like he's, like, 33 at the beginning of the show, and that means Neo's about 23, which obviously she doesn't look it, but she's tiny, and it's a very youthful looking face, but some people are lucky like that, you know. Honestly, it's not that surprising, all things considered. It's just interesting to consider, because it's, like, not clear, and like I said, Roman has to have gotten arrested some point between here and the beginning of the show, and I don't know how, because this shows how that he's a fairly competent, and he was always shown to be pretty competent, like, throughout his time on the show. Like, you know, with a few exceptions, he was always shown to be pretty competent. And this book reinforces that in spades. So it's not entirely clear when exactly he, like, gets arrested, but I am curious about that. But let's see. Oh, that's right. Let's see, then there's the double bluff with the donuts. Okay, so let me explain this, because I don't, like, that might not be entirely clear if you haven't read the book. I'm assuming anybody who's watching this has read the book, or some other minute detail. Point is that Roman walks up to a car, or a police car, with a bag of donuts. He offers the donuts to one of the cops, and then is taken to a restaurant that is called Just Right, which I want to point out is also the name of that rest stop that Yang stops at in volume 5. Which, I mean, it's an entirely different establishment in the middle of nowhere. 2 people coming up with a name like Just Right is hardly simple, although considering that place came off like it was a chain, that seems a little weird. Like, the rest stop, the gas station, essentially, not the restaurant. Although, I wouldn't be entirely surprised, but it would be a little weird in this universe. You know, I don't know. I mean, maybe they have restaurant chains. Do you guys think they have restaurant chains? They probably do. I just think it's a little weird when you get down to it. What would they be called? Because apparently they have a soda called Dr. Piper, which is hilarious, I might add, but still ridiculous. Kind of like on the same level as, say, having an actor called Spruce Willis. I don't know. I love this universe, but sometimes it just throws me for a loop in the weirdest ways. But anyway, he gets taken to a restaurant called Just Right. And just as he's like, you know, he's getting into a confrontation with Junior's father, Hei Zhong. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Tell me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Or is it Hai Zhong? You know, how is it pronounced? But anyway, you know, the big bear, essentially. That's what it is. Like the Papa Bear, whatever you want to call it, like from Goldilocks, essentially, because that's what Junior is, the little bear from Goldilocks. He's always represented that, in case you didn't know. Point is, then, like, just as Roman is done heckling the crime boss, and the crime boss calls his two, you know, like, what's the term? I'm great. I'm terrible at remembering such minor shit. Freaking the cops that are on the take. They're the dirty cops. The dirty cops. He calls his dirty cops to take Roman. Of course, Roman drugged them, gave them the donuts. I love that the one guy even examined the donuts and still ate them and went down, because apparently, and I love it because, like, when I went into this situation, here's the thing. With Roman, you could 100% say either way whether he would or would not have, like, put something in the donuts. That's his personality either way. He would have given them the donuts just for the hell of it because he thinks it's funny and he's messing with them a little bit. Or he did what he actually did, and he, like, put something in it to knock them out at the opportune moment. I also think it's very funny that the only reason he doesn't get it, because let's think about this. This guy, despite, you know, his appearance, like the big bear, let's call him, like, the big bear. He, like, because I have a hard time saying his name, I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, but the big bear is so strong that it could grip Roman, like, can't get out his grip. He punches, I think he kicks him in the face, and yet the guy still keeps a secure grip on Roman's arm. And the only reason he's kicked out is because of his spider tattoo. Also, we find out that tattoo was, you know, tattooed over with his mark, his jack-o'-lantern mark, which is a nice touch. I like that. That's a cool detail, in my opinion, because it's logical, it makes sense, it works within universe. Also, that tattoo artist was way too eager to cut off Roman's arm. What the heck is going on in this tattoo parlor? I need to know, like, what is up with that? I mean, come on. But, like, the point is, with the donuts, like, Roman, like I said, it's basically a double bluff. He comes in saying it's just a gift and allows them to examine it and whatnot and blah, blah, blah. But he's so casual about it that it throws them off and they eventually just eat the donuts. And it comes into play later as a sort of, I guess you could say, what do you want to call it? A backup plan, a safety mechanism, like, you know, just as something for him to fall back on in case of an emergency, which is what, because he figured that this was how things were going to go down. And that's Roman, again, to a T. But what I find very interesting is that one of the dirty cops just eats the donuts right away, like a complete moron, like, without even thinking about it. At least the other guy at least examined the donuts before taking a bite. This idiot, I forget which one, it was like Brick and Mortar? No, those are two Little Miss Malachites guys. One of them is named Looney, I think. I don't remember the name. Like, the point is, like, one of them actually just eats, like, takes a bite out of this freaking donut, because even though it was from Roman, with no hesitation, and that is the dumbest thing I have seen in a long time from a fictional character. Like, that is actually stupid for a number of reasons, not the least of which, this criminal, you are cops. You might be dirty cops, but you're still cops, so you should be smarter than this. And so, a criminal willingly, without even you knowing, gets into the back of your freaking car and hands you some donuts. You, unlike your partner, decides to just take a bite. And as the points out, there could have been a bomb in that bag. You didn't know what was actually in there, but, you know, it was donuts. And it's just like, it's so stupid. I've never seen a character, like, I've seen people review, and this is not a review, this is more of a discussion. I mean, it is kind of a review, but it's more of a discussion. I have seen characters be very stupid in the past, but I have never seen someone that dumb ever. Like, in any piece of fiction I am familiar with. Like, just take a bite out of a freaking donut and not think about it in the least. Like, that could have killed you. It didn't, but it was, in fact, a threat. It's like, I don't know. I just never seen a character be that genuinely stupid, and it throws me a little bit. It was funny. Like, because the initial scene with the donuts in the car is funny. And then the fact that it turned out that Roman was being that clever is also funny. It's just, and people can be stupid like in real life, but when characters do it, it's usually not considered a good thing. But I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. It's just funny, but it also, like, makes me feel things. That's the best way I can describe it. I know I'm focusing way too much on this donut thing, but I can't. It's such dumb. The next thing is a little bit minor by comparison. I mean, the donut thing is minor. This is almost more substantial just because. But, like, the next thing is a phrase that I think, like, came from Neo while she was thinking. I think she was, like, specifically thinking about, like, something to do with her uniform. I forget exactly which scene it came up, but she thinks you can't put the moon back together, which as a phrase in the world of Remnant makes 100% sense. Like, it makes 100% sense to me that they would have a phrase like that, that would be a phrase that exists in their universe. And that's just something I want to point out. It's such a minor piece of world building, but I like stuff like that. That stuff kind of sticks out to me, and I really enjoy that. Going forward once again, next thing, excuse me, my throat's getting a little dry. I don't know how long this video is going to actually end up being, but, like, I have been sitting here talking for a while now. Anyway, the next thing to come out is a thought of Roman's, actually, in contrast to Neo's thought, but it's like that he thinks of, like, you know, he thinks that, like, Neo's semblance compared to a lot of other people's semblances, and this is true if you watch the series as a whole and you look at most examples, most semblances are only good for combat, and this is Roman's thought process, and I think I don't think there's necessarily any jealousy or any resentment there for the fact that he doesn't know his semblance or never tried or never could, whatever. You know, he doesn't have a semblance. So the point is, he is actually really, like, impressed, you know, like, kind of with Neo's semblance, and as such, and he points out in his own brain that most of the time semblances are mostly good for combat. And he's not wrong. Most semblances are only good for combat. There are a few exceptions, of course, that, like, are almost, but most of those exceptions are far and few between, whereas 90% of like, think about Weiss's semblance, and which is, I remind you, is hereditary, and therefore all genetically related Shnees have it. That semblance is so useful when it comes to combat, but when you think about it, what good would Weiss's semblance be outside of combat? I mean, yes, okay, granted, you can use the platforms for other things, and you can get the summons to do things besides fight, but when you get down to it, it's a little bit more egalitarian than most semblances, but it's still mostly good for combat. And it's not like Weiss has really shown an aptitude for using it for anything but combat. So, and let alone any other member of her family, like specifically Winter and the little bit we've seen from Willow. We haven't really seen any other use of it. I assume, like, you know, Nicholas Schnee used it. Whitley probably has the potential, though he's obviously never used it before. Point is, most semblances just really aren't that useful outside of combat scenarios. And the fact that, like, Neo's is, I'd never even thought about it before, but it's true. Her semblance is much more useful. Like, if anything, it's much more useful out of combat than it is in combat. And it's useful in combat. It's just not primarily a combat semblance. And I like that. I like that that's brought up in the book. And I like that Roman, a person who never bothered to find his semblance or find out what it is, even, like, is the one who puts that thought into context. Let's see, moving on, we got to chapter 15, and I wanted to point out that, like, a couple of things. Like, one, there's a reference to a fire sword, which RWBY referenced in the second chapter the series, which the way she said it made it seem like a fire sword is like a pretty common kind of weapon, or like, you know, but even though we'd never seen one in the show, but Neo apparently also pointed out somebody having like fought against somebody with a fire sword, and it's like, okay, so they do exist. It's just something I wanted to point out. But also, this is the first, chapter 15 is the first time Neo refers to herself as Neo mentally, and starts like from her point of view, like it's a third person, you know, point of view, but from her point of view, she is now Neo, not Trivia. I don't know how to say her freaking name. I really swear. She's Neo. She's always been Neo, but now she's really Neo. And I like that, because it's a nice shift, finally accepting who she really is and coming into her own. And I appreciate that. Like, also, can I just, as weird as it is, I have to point this out again. Miss Browning's school is probably my favorite addition to the world of Remnant, because it's such a bizarre yet fascinating. It's almost an inversion of a standard trope when it comes to, you know, the restricted, proper educational school for girls, or anybody really, but mostly for girls, as shown in most pieces of fiction, that teaches them etiquette and poise and balance and yada yada yada. And the fact that it's more than that, and that there's a lot more going on under the surface, is freaking brilliant, and I kind of love that. And it's a really one of my favorite additions to the book, honestly, and to the world of Remnant in general. Going forward, we get like a Doom Cannon, as mentioned by Roman. It's such an offhand thing. It's one of his ideas that is like unlikely to occur, and it's like that's a RWBY Chibi reference, right? That's like an actual reference. That had to be something like, there's no way E.C. Myers thought to put that in. That was probably something that was in the notes from Eddie and Carrie. Somebody decided to put this in regardless, and it's definitely a RWBY Chippy reference. Like, there's no way that's not a reference to this one. Like, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Come on. Anyway, I only got like, I only have 2 notes left after this, so we'll, you know, not, like, we're almost done here. You know, I'll probably, I don't know if I have any other specific thoughts, but, you know, just like what okay. You know, and it's like specifically, once again, Roman is like looking over his crime boards and looking at the stuff he's thinking about. And why most criminal organizations tend to fall apart is that most of the criminals are in it for themselves. And what I like about that is, while it's not exactly a criminal organization, at least in the strictest sense, Salem's entire operation essentially fits this bill, because outside of Tyrion serving Salem directly, everybody is in it for their own personal goals. And that's why it doesn't really work. Like, why in the long term, even discounting whatever Salem's actual goal is, because I'm not 100% sure it's the ultimate suicide or taking over the world or some variation of both. I think, like, whatever Salem's actual goal is, I believe 100% that, like, how do I put this? Like, I believe that, like, in the long term, her whole thing would have failed, at least with any given group where she runs it like this. Because, say what you will about Ozpin, he's a complicated character. But he, you know, even without his presence, the team, you know, Team RWBY, what was left of Juniper, Oscar, even like eventually Crow and Maria to a certain extent, all decided to continue with Ozpin's plan. Maybe not exactly as Ozpin himself would have done it, but essentially they followed through with Ozpin's goal. And it's because it's a truer goal, and it's a goal that they can believe in. Salem, on the other hand, reinforces the idea that to get what you want, you need my help. To get what you want, you need me. But before I give you what you want, before you receive your due rewards, you must first help me get what I want, what I desire. And that's really the reason that Salem's organization is, in essence, doomed to fail. I mean, we've already seen that. I mean, like, discounting, like, obviously the whole thing with Hazel. Hazel's situation was, again, very complicated, but he turned against her. Obviously, like, Emerald was never going to stick around, but it's, like, pretty clear that was a problem as well. And then you take into account the fact that, like, you know, like, Cinder killing Watts and betraying Neo. I mean, Neo was never a firm member of the group anyway, but like at the very least, like betraying Neo and killing Watts shows how this organization, like having people who just are outside of just being selfish, and that's really the through line for all of them, even Hazel. They were all selfish, and therefore they're wanting what they do more than what Salem wants is what stops their goals from being obtainable in and of itself. I don't know. It's a very complicated issue, but I found that very interesting, and I agree, and I like that Roman is aware of this, and that's why he never really liked the idea of working with a partner or with the larger group like the Spiders, as, you know, the, like Little Miss Malachite's syndicate, you know? Never wanted to be involved because he didn't trust people, and he came to trust Neo, but that's the exception. And then finally, like, this is just literally the last note I wrote, and I found this freaking funny. I just found this made me giddy in the weirdest way possible, and I found it, maybe it's because there's a sort of a dark irony there that that Neo fails to recognize, but Salem is involved. So what I find so funny is that Neo apparently read The Girl in the Tower, and we all know that particular remnant fairy tale is about Salem. And in fact, it's very likely Salem is the one who spread it because of the note she sent to try and get help to free her from her father's grasp in the first place. And whether it was is a story told later in it, you know, one of Ozma's many exploits, regardless, it spread and became a fairy tale even post the initial, the original humanity's destruction. It's even a fairy tale into the new era with the new humanity, the second time around humanity. And what I find so funny about that is, one, Neo obviously relates to Salem, you know, the girl in the tower, you know, in the way she talks about it. Maybe not, as she points out, the powerful magician coming to free her, but she still relates to it. And what I find especially funny, too, is she meets Salem. Maybe they don't have a conversation. You know, Salem asks Cinder about Neo, but they do talk. But, she does meet Salem. And what's hilarious about it is, I don't think Neo definitely doesn't know that Salem is the girl from the tower. And that's completely ironic. I would love it if Neo had been told this, if she knew that Salem was the girl in the tower. If she knew, I feel like that would probably blow her mind. And it blew my mind that this little inclusion that she'd read that story. It's such a minor detail, but I think it's hilarious when you look at it from this perspective that Neo does not know who she's actually talking about. And if she did, she probably wouldn't be thinking about it in the same way she is. It's just funny. Does anybody else think this is as funny as I do? Because I think it's hilarious. I don't know. I don't know. But regardless, that's the end of my notes. However, before I sign off or anything, there is one other thing I want to talk about, and that's how Neo and Roman's perspective is essentially the complete opposite. Roman comes in not wanting anybody's connections. Obviously, being abandoned by his mother, probably had something to do with that, and the rough life he led on the streets, that probably had something to do with it. But the fact is, he didn't want to be connected to anybody. He didn't want, he didn't want to start anything with Cammy, as he calls her. He didn't want to be part of the Spiders. He didn't want to work for Little Miss. He didn't want any of that. He wanted to be 100% numero uno, number one, by himself. He wanted to be, by himself. Neo, by contrast, is so lonely that she thinks up an imaginary friend that is essentially a separate, if not a whole other part of her own personality. And as such, it's she's so lonely because her parents just aren't there for her that she conjures up a best friend. And when that best friend is unfortunately destroyed, she slowly emerges as who she really is. She finds out who she really is. But it's funny to think about, they come into this from completely different viewpoints. Even their backgrounds are opposing in every way, and yet they come together and become a single unit. And, like, you know, before I read this book, I'd always looked at their relationship as probably being something like a father-daughter thing, and based on this book, I still wouldn't dismiss that concept, maybe, but the fact is that regardless, there was a connection. They were best friends. They cared about each other, and they were the only people the other cared about in the world. Like, that's evident from the beginning. And as such, it's interesting to see them come together in this way and really connect and become their only source of light, compared to, say, everybody else who remotely worked for Salem. You know, technically it was like a, you know, like 2 degrees separation there, whereas, like, you know, they worked under Cinder, who worked for, like, who obviously worked for Salem. But the fact is that, like, they show, by that connection, and that connection was, like, you know, touched on minutely in the show, but really, like, really worked out here, like, really, like, you know, really, like, fleshed out here in this book. The fact of the matter is that they, like, they cared about each other in a way that almost no other members of Salem's cabal really did care about anyone else. Like, Tyrion is obviously obsessed with Salem, sees her as a goddess, as the queen, the absolute highest, like, you know, he calls her their divine savior, and, you know, that's his viewpoint, and it's very obvious. And then you have Watts, who obviously, like, you know, again, one of those people who just didn't care about anybody. Cinder clearly doesn't care about anybody who's alive. Maybe she cared about, like, you know, Rhodes when he was alive, but, like, he's dead and there's nobody else now. Like, you know, maybe, like, Emerald, like, cares about Cinder, but in such a one-way relationship, it's just not the same. You know, you could say that there's, like, something, and the best comparison between Roman and Neo is probably Mercury and Emerald and their relationship, except it's, like, I would say that, like, the two of them, like, have probably never addressed how they actually care about each other, but that is also evident, especially, like, at least from Emerald, Mercury's end towards Emerald. Like, he looked out for her multiple times going forward, and they clearly have, like, a sort of jokey relationship when they're relaxed together. Like, specifically, like, that scene where they're joking about killing Tuxin at the beginning of Volume 2. It's very clear that they have, like, even though she was a little annoyed with him when they first meet up at the beginning of the chapter, it's very clear that they do have some sort of camaraderie. And even going back to the flashback in Volume 3, where we learn that, you know, Emerald didn't want Mercury to join their group at all, it's very clear that they have grown some sort of bond. But comparatively speaking, it's very clear, like, Neo and Roman come across like they really know that how much they care about each other. And I will probably talk about this because I'm going to be talking about the actual show going into the future. I'm not going to get too deep into that right now, but I'm just saying I'll probably address that going forward. But it's interesting to look at their relationship and see how they came in from opposite points and came to care about each other so much. And it's so important, especially considering Neo is one of the people who fell into the void and fell into Neverland, Wonderland, you know, whatever, the Nine Realms, whatever the island with the big tree is that we saw a glimpse of in both the end of Volume 8 and the sneak peek for Volume 9, regardless of whatever this place is, she fell there. And she still wants, like, she was willing, like, with everything that had happened, she was still trying to kill Ruby on the way down. We saw that in the sneak peek. And that makes it very clear that she's not done with revenge just yet. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen, because there are only so many ways this can go. Now, the reason this book was released, I'm willing to bet, is because we're going to be doing some stuff with Neo going forward. Either Neo is going to die, and I know that some people are going to be upset about this. If it's well done, it'll make me a little bit sad, especially having read this. But all things considered, I won't be too heartbroken about it. Or Neo could become an ally, as unlikely as that seems. And I think that's the least likely of my 3 options that I'm going to bring up here. But she could. It would be a reluctant thing, and she's done terrible things, far worse things than Emerald, I'd be willing to bet. Like Emerald, even though she was complicit in the death of Tuxin, she wasn't the one who actually killed Tuxin. But Emerald, like, you know, obviously hasn't done anything quite as severe as Neo has. But all things considered, all things considered, like, the third option, of course, is that Neo just becomes her own agent. She becomes a third party who probably works against Cinder and Salem, not necessarily in favor of the heroes, but at least in a way that benefits the heroes. And that's a possibility. We don't know. We really have no idea. But they clearly wrote it where she was one of the people who fell for a reason, and we're going to be seeing that in Volume 9, no doubt. And I have no doubt in my mind that the reason that they wrote, that this book was written, was for the same reason. It has something to do with Neo's character arc going forward, whatever that may be. Maybe it's death, maybe it's not quite a redemption, but some sort of alliance, or maybe it's just her, once again, changing who her target is when it comes to avenging Roman. We don't know. But regardless, I'm looking forward to it. And overall, having gone through this book, I would say it's a solid, if I ranking the three E.C. Myers books off the top of my head, I would say, like I said, I liked Before the Dawn a little bit more than After the Fall, and a little bit more than this. So Before the Dawn, I would go with a 9 on that one. I would call it a 9. This, I would, like going with, After the Fall, I would call that one a solid, yeah, I would call that one a solid 7.2. That's what I'm going to go with. And then this one is a 7.8 for me. It's good. It's not great. I've seen worse, but I've also seen better. I do like this book. I like this book a lot, actually. But I just liked, I liked the last one a little bit more. Regardless, I'm happy we got this. It's a nice teaser. It's a nice appetizer for what's more than likely coming in Volume 9. And it was nice to see how things were back in the day, seeing things in the past. Honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing more stuff set in the past. Maybe something about Team Stark. That's my primary obsession when it comes to the show. The show's mythos and the show's history in universe outside of the main story. But regardless, I think that's all I have to say for now, and if you enjoyed this at all, please feel so inclined to visit me again when it comes to, the Imagination Circus, and, if you feel so inclined, like I said, just visit me again in the future. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming.